In 1993, Frank Sanier was walking on the campus of Philippine Union College with some friends and family. And he was there at the chapel. As they walked out of the chapel, the students did. Some 2,000 students are pouring out of the chapel. And he's looking at them. And the thought hits him. What would happen if these young people could be supported to share Jesus with their friends and neighbors in their own communities? And the idea began to eat on him. And then he thought, well, not just in the Philippines, what about in other countries of the world? What about in other places where there's other people that don't know about Jesus? What would happen? And he said, oh, how could we ever raise that much money? And he said it was like a thought, an audible voice spoke to him. That's my part. That was 1985. And Frank continued to think about it and talk about it and share. Talked with some friends at Sabbath school and church in different places, and finally started raising some money. And by 1993, they got their first Bible worker. In fact, that's when gospel outreach was started. And he started supporting one Bible worker in the mountain provinces of the Philippines. This man knew the language. He knew the local people. He knew how to live on the cheap. He knew how the people lived. It was very simple, very easy to support an American missionary to go there, to learn the language, to learn the customs. It's next to impossible. But this worked fine. It worked great. The young man did a great job. And by the end of that first year, they had not just one man in the Philippines working, but there were 12 others working in a variety of provinces. And there were 12 people, and in a few years they had people in Bangladesh and in some 23 other missions and conferences around the world. Gospel outreach was started in 1993. That's 20 years ago. 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, my bad. See, you're not even counting. See, Thomas, you got it, but Tom missed it. He's a mathematical genius here, so you know how it goes. But 30 years ago they started, and they're now supporting some 2,000 missionaries or more in some, I'm going to forget the number, a lot of different countries of the world. They focus on the 1040 window. And the 1040 window is from 10 degrees north to 40 degrees north of the equator, stretches from West Africa all the way across to Japan. It's an amazing area. And in that area, some 97% of the world's unreached people live. And what percent of our mission offerings do you think goes to unreached people? And I'm talking about all churches, everybody. What percent of the mission offering goes to fund to reaching these unreached people? 1%. Yeah, we'd like to think 50% or something, right? It's something like 2 or 3%. I don't know exactly, but it's a very small percentage. Basically, what we do as Christians is we tend to reach the people that have already heard about Jesus, and we try to win them over to our side or whatever. And we want to give them another chance, another opportunity to hear the gospel. And yet there are people in the world that have never heard about Jesus in any way. And they don't have any way of hearing about him. None of their neighbors know about him, none of their friends, none of their villages. And another thing that makes it very interesting is these countries can often be very hard to reach. Many of them are of Buddhist background or Hindu, and a huge group of Muslims live in that area. In fact, the vast majority of Muslims live in that area. Well, I heard about gospel outreach years ago. They've been part of the valley here for many years, and they would come to our church and do rallies once a year or so, and we would connect with them at various times. And Shirley and I always talked about supporting them. We said, yeah, it's a good cause, it's a good cause. And we kept thinking about it and talking about it, and you know how that goes sometimes. And then this last October, they had another gospel outreach rally. If you remember, October 1, we had that nice gentleman from India came and spoke with us again. And we appreciated what he had to share, appreciated his stories, and appreciated him sharing. Well, they had a rally in the afternoon over at the village church, and I went to that, and my heart was touched again. And I said, well, I may not have a lot of money, but I have some time. Maybe they could use, they said they needed volunteers. And so I said, why not? And so, they've got stuff to do. I can take an afternoon and go do some clerical work and go add some money or, whatever. I don't know what they need. So they started talking to me, and I had a good visit with them the next week or maybe the week after. And they started talking to me, and they said they basically have two categories of work. One is the clerical work in the office, answering the phone and returning emails and raising money and stuff like that. And the other one is in the field. We started talking about in the field, and I said, well, that kind of fits me a little better. But of course, the time commitment is a little different. And they started talking about it, and I became interested. And I met with that October 1 last year, I met with the guy who's the Gospel Outreach Coordinator, Regional Director for Southeast Asia, including Indonesia and Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. And I had actually known him back in college some 35, 40 years ago, something like that. And a good man, and he was a few years ahead of me in college. But we started communicating, and pretty soon I started getting connected with him, and we started talking about a trip to Southeast Asia. He was going to leave in, I think it was early February or something, and of course that's when I was in Ethiopia. But it ended up, we left the end of March 26, and I was gone for 11 weeks to Southeast Asia. And that's a long time. I don't know. I'm sure y'all didn't know this, but you didn't miss me or anything. It was no problem. But it's a long trip to be away from home. But it was amazing. We had some amazing experiences there. And one of the most interesting things to me was living with somebody that you don't know at all for 11 weeks is a challenge, right? And I had no idea. Are Gary and I going to get along? Are we going to, is it going to be tense? Is this going to be difficult? And it was not tense at all. We hit it off in many ways, made many connections, and had just a great time working together. Now, it was not easy work. Some of it was exotics. We had some interesting foods and interesting fruits and interesting times together, but many times were very tough and it's difficult. We got to Indonesia, I think it was, anyway, we got to Indonesia, and one of the first things we had to do was go into a union office there and talk with them. And there'd been some major conflicts, I guess, butting of heads, difficulties with gospel outreach moving ahead there. And we're not sure if it's going to go well or not. And we got in there, and they're very concerned about some of the things we're doing, some of the ways gospel outreach is reaching out. And what do? We're not sure. But we went in, prayed about it, went in, had a pretty good meeting the first day, and then we went back the next day and had a great meeting, and things went well, and we think we're moving ahead. And I think things are good. But once you get the union on your side, then you can talk with the conferences and get them on your side. And that's where we want to do our major work, is working with the conferences. Gospel outreach doesn't, in general, gospel outreach's main focus is funding Bible workers in unreached areas. Okay? We don't send money to Cambodia to fund their local pastors. That's not our role. We want to reach out to people that are reaching unreached people, villages and communities. And I don't know the exact percentage, but something over 95% of money given to gospel outreach goes to that purpose. When you give money to gospel outreach, it doesn't go to pay the air conditioning. It doesn't pay for the building fund. Eventually, it wasn't too many years ago, they finished this building over in College Place, a very simple building, but there's a lot of things go on there. Gospel outreach is run by volunteers. The leadership is all volunteer. The regional directors are all volunteer. The people that come in and do the work are almost all volunteer. They do have one person they support as a kind of an administrator that kind of oversees things and gets a little stipend there. But it's amazing work. So we got to Indonesia. We get there, make some connections, had a good time, but we were so concerned about that. But when we walked out of that meeting, it was good. And we realized there's some possibilities. And then we continued to move ahead in various places. Looked from Indonesia, trying to think of, I better look at my notes once in a while here. So if I don't once in a while, we're in big trouble. Some 97% of the world's unreached people live in the 1040 window, and for a small amount we can help fund a Bible worker in that area. So we were in Indonesia for 2 weeks, visited a couple of other conferences besides the main one there in Jakarta, and then we flew to Papua, Indonesia. The island of New Guinea, huge islands, split down the middle, north and south, and the eastern half of it is Indonesia, and the western half is New Guinea. Now, Indonesia used to be called Irian Jaya. That's a long time ago. Anyway, we flew in there and went to Adventist Aviation. They picked us up at the airport. It's an overnight flight from Jakarta. We got there, and one of the first things I wanted to do is get internet, because I had a grandson that was supposed to be born about then. And I was able to get online, and Everett was born. I was so happy. And I was able to talk with my daughter, and that was good. It was great to be there and connect. But these people had big plans for us, and they are supporting work. Adventist Aviation is doing a work up in the mountains of Papua and in very remote areas. When they say remote areas, I mean very remote areas. Somebody asked me once if we got to any places where there weren't any roads. Yes, we did. There were no roads into these villages. There was no way in there. We flew in. It was about an hour and a half flight, I think, flew into one village, a small village where they were building a school and some teachers' houses there. And then we flew across the valley to the next school, which is a 2-minute flight, less than 2 minute, minute and a half flight. He did it in less than 2 minutes with his flaps down, okay? So he's just coasting, just moving slowly over there. He doesn't like to recycle the flaps anymore, and you have to, you know. So we got over there. That next village, we stayed there. We were planning to stay one night. And we got there, and the kids are singing as we got closer to the school. To get to the school from the strip, the landing strip, it's about a half-hour, 45-minute hike down over the hill and down to it. We get down there and the kids are singing, and it's a slippery trail. It's not a very well-prepared trail, but we made it. Got down there, spent the night. The next morning we got up, and there's, I think, 5 or 6 teachers at the school, and they're teaching kids that have never been to school before. This is amazing, and they're teaching them in Indonesian, because the teachers are almost all from Indonesia. That's what they speak, is Indonesian, and so the children are having to learn a new language and learning to school. But this helps unite the country. The government actually built this school. The government came in and raised money and built the school, funded some company to fly all the materials in there, get it built. And it was a very expensive school. They hired teachers to go up there and run the school. And the teachers basically said after a short time, "You don't pay us enough for this." And so the school was abandoned. So they came to the Adventists and asked them to run the school. And they found some teachers, sent these young people up there, and it's a miserable place to live. They're running water. They had no running water when we got there. They were carrying, it was, I don't know, a ways off to where the water was coming out of a pipe. They could get water there, carrying it back to their house. While we were there, they actually made some major improvements. They got running water right outside their house, and they're moving toward getting it into the house, obviously. They have a small house there. They have a heat source. It's called wood, and there's matches they light fires with, you know what I mean? And they cook on the ground. It's very interesting. It's very smoky inside the smokehouse, let me put it that way, or inside the cookhouse. It's a difficult time. Cook big pots of rice. It's a difficult situation, but these young people are committed to what they're doing and making a difference there. The nurse at the school, doing an amazing work. An old gentleman comes, and he's got, with his stick, and he doesn't speak Bahasa Indonesian like the nurse does, but they do their best to communicate. And he's got, with his shovel or his hoe or something, he cut the webbing between his big toe and the next toe, you know what I mean? And I know it hurts to think about. And you try healing that up when he's walking barefoot in the mud every day, okay? It just doesn't heal quickly. but she's doing what she can to get him better. And healing other people, bringing, helping solve the different problems that come in, whatever comes up. And sometimes she has to walk to another village to get done what she needs to do. But keep working, and they're committed to what they're working. And when it comes to these schools and the places, the need is great. It's huge. Our pilot said that there was, or somebody with Adventist Aviation showed us where the school was. And this school was in an area that used to be known as Cannibal Valley, okay? And that gives you a little essence of what used to go on there. And they haven't been reached. They didn't have the landing strips. So you got to get the landing strip built, the connections. It's not easy work, but there's people to reach. The school there is reaching some 5 different villages around. Kids are coming in from all over to come to their school, and they hike for an hour and a half or 2 hours to get there. It's not an easy thing, but the kids are committed. So we were told there were some 5,000 villages like that were open to schools being built. So the need is great. The need is huge there. And there's a lot of good that can be done there. And while we were there, we were planning to stay one night, but our pilot took off. It was a Friday morning. He took off, did some other work that he needed to do. One of the things they do with Adventist Aviation is evacuation flights for people that had medical emergencies. And the medical emergency that he had, we found out later, there was a young man who was a teacher at a school down, I think it was it was in the lowlands, but it was a remote area. And this teacher was the nurse there at his school and had a huge group of people that he was ministering to, but he got malaria. And he tried getting an IV in himself like 3 or 4 times and was unsuccessful, so he's getting dehydrated. They realized the only thing he can do, they need to get him out. And so they had to hike for about an hour, carry him for about an hour to get to the river, where they get in a canoe, float for a while, and then they had to get out and hike for another hour to get to the airstrip. And eventually they got him to the airstrip. They took him over to another town where he could get to a clinic. And that's where we met him when we flew into that town. But that was one of the things the pilot was doing that Friday morning, and also moving supplies around, food, things like that. And so we went up to the airstrip Friday morning expecting to be flown out. And when the pilot came in, it was clouded over. And he flew around in circles a while and eventually gave up. So we knew he wasn't going to be back on Friday. So we spent a couple more nights up there. Now this is Indonesia, okay? It's down south of the equator just a little bit, but the elevation was up high. It was about 7,000 or 8,000 feet. It was what we considered cool at that time, maybe in the 50s at night. And we obviously weren't dressed for that with sleeping bags and stuff, but we all survived. It's amazing what you can do. Indonesia's a huge country. It's about 10% bigger than Alaska. If you look at the size of the country compared to other countries of the world, it's about number 15 on the list. Population, where do you think it ranks? No, number. Number 1 is India, number 2 is China, number 3 is US, number 4 is Indonesia. Okay, it's not a small country. It's the world's largest Muslim population. In economy, Indonesia is about number 15. It's not a small player in the world. It's a big player. Huge work to be done. A lot of work to be done there. In Thailand, we got there, and we've had real challenges in Thailand and work to move forward. And we met with them, and things were not going well. And with the conference officers, things were not going well at all. And then finally, one lady slipped in, and she'd been working with Gospel Outreach or connecting with them, not working with them, but she was the one coordinating with the conference and Gospel Outreach. And she just gently worked through the challenges and helped us realize that we can move ahead. So hopefully things are going to move ahead there in a good way. I told you last week a little bit about Paul and Lena Adams, a couple. She's a Swedish lady, got married, had a couple kids, she became a Christian in her early 20s, if I remember right. Came to America, married a guy. He was not a believer. The kids were singing Jesus songs at home, Sabbath school songs, that kind of thing. And he just made him angry, made him mad, and many things, and he left the home. So this dear lady, here she is in America with 2 kids, and she found another husband, and things were good, and they connected, had a couple more kids, and then he got brain cancer, and he passed away sometime later despite the best care. And so now she's got 4 kids, 3 girls, and the youngest is the son. And what's she going to do? Living at a small church in small town in Montana? But there was one man there. He was a bachelor in his 40s, and they began to connect. And the problem was, being a bachelor in his 40s, obviously, he was not real social. He was kind of to himself. But they eventually connected and got married. And they decided they wanted to do some mission service before their kids were grown and out of the house. They were planning to go to India. That didn't work out, so finally they decided they would go to Thailand. They went to Thailand, got there, didn't know what their mission was, didn't know what they were going to do, didn't know what they were supposed to do. One of their daughters took a job across the river into Cambodia, or into Myanmar, and began teaching there. And it wasn't too long they get this call from here. There was civil war in Myanmar. And they said, we're supposed to evacuate, but I think it's okay. The shooting has kind of died down. I think we'll be all right. And so she didn't go out that night, but I think it was the next night. Dad, we need to depart. We need to get out of here. And so Dad starts up the old truck and drives down to the river. It's about a couple hundred yards from their house. It wasn't that far. And begins ferrying people that get across the river, ferrying them back up to their place. And they start helping people. And pretty soon they realize this is where their mission was. Paul and Lena have been raising money from wherever they can. Different churches help out. Different places help out, give a little money. They had a small charity. They're doing everything they can. They had a house in the States here. At one point, they sold their house. So they don't have a plan B. They're counting on the Lord, and the Lord has come through time after time for them. And just excited about the way God works in them. The school they run there is an amazing school. They had 360 students this last year. And this term, they started with 600 students. That's about a 69% increase. Okay, it's a huge increase in the number of students. And they don't have all the funding. Somebody asked, well, how do the students pay their tuition? Well, you just do the best you can. Make it work as best you can. Paul and Lena have taken lots of kids into their home, taken lots of things on, but we're just excited to see how God is working there. Many interesting people I met. One is Johan. Johan is one of the pastors in Cambodia. We met him. He was born in a refugee camp. His parents were struggling to make things work. It wasn't easy. His mom started a business kind of as a loan shark, I think is a fair way to call it. And Dad was, let's just say, buying and selling on the black market, okay? There was a lot of conflict, a lot of different military units in Cambodia. And so he would slip across the border into Thailand, purchase some ammunition and guns, bring them across, and sell them. And the market was really good. The markup was nice. And he could make a fair bit of money doing that. Pretty soon he started graduating. He made more money. So he moved up to motorbikes and then cars and was doing very well. But what happens when you do that? Well, occasionally he would give people, the buyer, or who he's buying it from, he would give them money. And then they wouldn't deliver the goods. And he had to have that happen a few times. Then his oldest son died, and his wife died. And the business crashed, because she was the brains behind the money operation. And he had a lot of debts. Well, in this country, if you have a lot of debts, you have a big problem. But in Cambodia at that time, if you have a lot of debts, you have a big problem, but your family has a big problem too. And Johan and his older brother, I think he was about 13 or 14 at the time, they were sent to a farm that a rich lady he'd borrowed money from. They were sent to a farm that she had way out in the boondocks, and their responsibility was to grow rice on the farm. They would come about every 2 weeks, bring him some supplies, some food, a little bit. But he says sometimes they were out hunting for frogs or fish or snakes or toads or anything else they could to eat, so they would have enough to supplement their diet. They lived there about a year and a half, then they went to another place, had to work there. They're living out under tarps, whatever they can find to make life work. But life was very, very difficult. But Johan was a gentle man. He was a kind man, and he had the love of the Lord in his heart, and he was so gracious. He was so kind, and God is using him in a mighty way. Friends, things happen in our lives. Things change. And they can change very, very quickly. We're used to change being incremental, right? Just a little bit. You know things are going to be a little different tomorrow. But sometimes they can change very suddenly. We got back here on June 11, and it was a few days before that, so maybe early part of June. I was jogging in Indonesia, in Jakarta. We'd found a hotel near the airport there. Busy road outside, busy 2-lane road. When I say busy 2-lane road, it's not a fancy road. It's a fairly narrow road, okay? And there's cars going, it was one way, cars going one way on the road, but motorcycles on both sides kind of going the other way if they needed to, okay? They didn't usually everybody flowed one way, but if you're on a motorcycle, you don't want to ride clear around the block to get to where you want to be. You're just going a little way back. So they're going the other way too. So it's exciting. So I'm out jogging early one morning. It's my first time. Wasn't really looking forward to it because the road was so busy. But I went a little ways, went down a street, and I says, no, I don't want to go there. Came back, went down the street where the traffic was all going. And I'm jogging along, doing my best to stay over to the side and avoid traffic. And then suddenly, I see a development off to my left. And it was quiet, peaceful streets. And I got back in there, and the birds were singing. And it was such a relief to be at a quiet place in the middle of a big city. But things can happen very, very quickly. Friends, it's a saying, Confucius said something once. He said, you have sails, yet you cling to the anchor. And there's many things that hold us back, many things that hinder us, but God wants to break through and give us each freedom. One more story, and I'll be done. Seha, we met him when we got to Cambodia. Young man, great young man, 35 or so, I suppose. He said he was born in 1985. Yeah, 1985, okay? So he's good, but his birth certificate said he was born in 1983. Now, why would that be? Well, because they slipped a little money to the powers that be, and they could change that very quickly because he really wanted to go to school. And so his parents were willing to slip a little money where it needed to go and get him to school. Cambodia is a very corrupt country in many different ways and areas. But Seha grew up in a home. His father was an alcoholic, as many, many fathers are in Cambodia, especially at that time. His father was abusive toward his wife, and he was a philanderer. He didn't have any compunctions about sleeping with whoever he could find. It was not a real happy home. Seha's father's dad, so Seha's grandfather, was a witch doctor. And as a witch doctor, he was able to give certain gifts to his son. And one thing Seha's father found was that he was immune to bullets. Now, you can be immune to many things, but I didn't know you could be immune to bullets. But he was. I didn't elaborate. I didn't get a chance to talk to him too much about exactly what that meant, but he was immune to bullets. And so, he got into the military, a lot of conflicts in Cambodia. He gets in there, and he finds that he moves up in the ranks fairly quickly. His men soon learn they can trust him implicitly. If he says stop, they stopped. If he says move forward, they knew it was safe to move forward, and they would move forward. And he continued to move up in the ranks, and life was good. But then he got malaria. And the medication, the treatment in the military was not adequate at all. And so he went to, they released him from the military. He was able to get to start looking for his family. He knew they were probably in a refugee camp because they weren't at their home. He went to look and eventually found them in the refugee camp. And when he got home, he was very, very sick. Seha's mom began nursing him back to health, doing her best to provide for him, giving him what he needed, but he continued to go downhill. Eventually, they said he was literally skin and bones. And she picked him up and carried him to a hospital or in the refugee camp. Now, in the hospital, what kind of hospital do you get in a refugee camp? Well, it may not be a lot, but it just happened to be one that was run by the Adventist church, okay? And he gets there, it was what they call it Seventh-day Adventist Welfare Services, SAWS, I think at that time. And he was there. And at the Christian hospital, they started talking with him. They gave him medication, he started to get better, and they started praying with him. And he could see it was a different place. And he starts thinking about his life. And he starts wondering, and he says, the powers that I serve give me immunity to bullets, but they can't stop a little mosquito? Something's wrong with this picture. What I want to know, he says, I want to know who's in charge of the mosquito. Who controls the mosquito? Who made the mosquito? Yeah, and so they asked him if he wanted Bible studies. And he agreed. And what's the first Bible study he gets? But it's about the Creator God. And he begins to learn about this Creator God. This God who made everything, including the mosquitoes. This God who controls everything. And he began to hear and he began to listen, and his heart began to change. And it wasn't too long, and he got back home. And while God had been working on his heart, and God was working on him and changing him, he found that his wife wasn't at all excited about this foreign religion. She was happy as a Buddhist. She was content there. Well, in the refugee camp where they were living, one of the huge tasks they have to do is collect their firewood and split the firewood for their cooking fires. And he was willing to help her for the most part and did everything he could. Well, one week he was gone. On Sabbath morning, he went to church. And when he came home, he found his wife out splitting firewood and gathering firewood. And she asked him where he'd been. And he said, to church. And she was not a happy camper. In fact, she was livid. And she raised her axe up and was ready to bring it down on his skull. She was angry. And he stood there. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He didn't try to attack her. He just stood there. And his wife realized something has changed. This is not the man he used to be. God is working in his heart. And as she swung that axe, she was able to deflect it enough that the axe went and hit the water tank they had sitting there beside him. And she thought about it more and more as the week went on. And the next Sabbath, she went with him to church and learned about this Creator God. Oh, my friends, God can use anything to reach into our hearts. And when I talk about that story, I think about the evangelistic mosquito. You know, God can use anything to reach people. We forget He wants to reach into each of our hearts. And this God who can use a mosquito to reach into this man's heart, to change him and to change his family, can reach into our hearts too, and can reach into our family members' hearts as well. And those people that we long for, our God can connect with people. And He loves to make a difference in people's lives. What a privilege. Let's pray as we close. Father, I thank You for Your goodness. I thank You for Your power, Your willingness to reach into our lives wherever we are and to connect with us and to let us know that You love us and that You have a plan and a vision for us. Just bless us as people, bless us as individuals, and may we see Your hand as we move ahead. Just work in our hearts. And I thank You for Your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.